On a spring evening in a wealthy suburb of Houston, the silence of a two-story house was broken by 13 shots, which became the cause of another case, the investigation of which took more than 5 years. The house belonged to a respected couple, Robert and Doris, parents of 12-year-old twins, neighbors who were considered a model of stability and success. But behind the facade of a seemingly impeccable life, Robert's duplicity, a secret business, double accounts, hatred accumulated over the years, and the fear of losing control were hidden. A few minutes after the shots, Robert himself stood by the front door with his daughters in the car, not daring to go inside. He was waiting for the police, saying that he was afraid. Ego's reaction to what happened was the first lie, which was not obvious at the time.
Houston Police, this is Laura.
Yes, hi. I'm at my residence. Back door is ajar. My wife, to my best knowledge, was home. I'm getting no answer in the car, in the house. I have children with me in the car. What do I do?
Okay, just hold on. What's your last name?
Angleton, Angleton.
We get somebody out there, sir.
The most confusing and dangerous process began, in which the enemy turned out to be closer than anyone could have imagined. The Glenview neighborhood on the west side of Houston looked like it was drawn on a postcard. Tall maple trees lined the paths, lawns lined up, houses like from an architecture magazine. The Eldridge family settled here in the late 80s, when Robert, a former athlete and budding entrepreneur, opened a chain of elite tennis clubs, and his wife Doris became a local celebrity. Bright, charming, and benevolent. Everyone knew her as a caring mother, a participant in charity dinners and the soul of the neighborhood. No one knew that in the house drowning in jasmine, tension was building up, similar to static electricity before a thunderstorm. By the spring of 1997, their twin daughters were 12, and it seemed that the family had found stability. Doris filed for divorce, but continued to live in the house with her children and ex-husband, as if this was only a formal step on the way to freedom. At the same time, Robert maintained the image of an impeccable family man, continued to take the girls to training, appeared at school events, and even organized parties in honor of his wife's birthday, as if he was trying to turn back time. Only there was no warmth in his gaze for a long time, only the precise coldness of calculation. No one knew that the money with which he generously paid for all worldly pleasures was earned in a shady bookmaker scheme that brought in millions. No one knew that Robert's dating network stretched to the darkest corners of Houston. Even Doris had no idea how many secrets were kept in safes under the gym and in records hidden in secret compartments of his office. She only knew one thing. He was no longer the man she fell in love with. It seemed that she had some premonition that she was going to leave forever. Doris began noticing disturbing details long before she decided to file for divorce. Everything started with little things, notes with hints, missing papers, strange calls, during which there was deafening silence in the receiver. Robert began to return home later, avoided eye contact, locked doors that had been opened before. He spoke less and less about the future, as if he knew that it no longer existed for them. At some point, she realized that he controls her every step. Even when he was not around, she felt that someone was watching her. In the spring, she started correspondence on the internet, at first innocently to distract herself, then more deeply, until the figure of a new person appeared. He seemed understanding, calm, free from the fear that was gradually consuming her life in the house with Robert. It was a breath of air, and it was the last straw. Doris made a decision. She will leave. She has already enlisted the help of a lawyer, found an accountant to deal with the money, and even looked at housing in the Austin suburbs. All that remains is to wait for the date of the division of assets and pick up the daughters. But she did not know that her every step was being tracked. Robert, having lost control, began to act according to a different scenario, secretly, cold-bloodedly, as if solving a logical problem. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't make a scene. On the contrary, he became softer, kinder, even touchingly attentive, as if he was trying to return the favor to Doris. He gave her flowers, left notes under the car window, signed up for family therapy. Everything looked perfect, like a trap built without haste. At this time, his older brother reappeared in Robert's life, a man whom Doris could not stand. His appearance coincided with the moment when Doris's anxiety turned into true paranoia. Only now she understood. She felt not fear, but a premonition of the end. And she was not wrong. When Roger Eldridge reappeared in Texas, no one knew where he had been for the past months. They didn't wait for him, didn't call him, and certainly didn't want to see him in a house where everything was held in a delicate balance. Roger was older than Robert, hot-tempered, unpredictable, with a strange look and a heavy character, which always seemed dangerous. In their youth, they were inseparable, opened a joint business, burned out together and rebelled. But at some point, something broke between them. First because of money, then because of a woman, and in the end because of a lack of communication, which turned into a silent enmity. Roger lived in California, hid under other people's names, traded in used cars, engaged in things that could not be explained in one word. His voice was dry, his movements were controlled. He kept his hands in his pockets all the time, as if he was trying to hide something more than just tension. When he reappeared in Houston, no one knew why, but he rented an apartment, rented 2 cars, used fake documents, and behaved as if he was preparing for surgery. Doris saw him once. He was standing in the alley near the house, as if studying the habits of the family, memorizing the light from the windows, the footsteps in the corridor, the moments when the dog goes outside. She told a lawyer and a friend about it, but no one paid any attention to the words. Everyone thought that she was just nervous because of the divorce. Only Robert said nothing. He just looked out the window and, without looking away, watched as the car with his brother disappeared around the corner of the street. No one knew that an agreement had already ripened within him. Silent, dirty, almost mathematically verified. The price was named, the conditions were discussed. All that remains is to choose a day. The evening of April 16th in Houston was unusually warm and serene. On a sports field a few miles from Glenview, the twins played softball under the supervision of their father, who, as usual, portrayed caring and involvement. He encouraged them, waved his hands, discussed the throwing technique, as if everything was real. At the same time, Doris went home to change clothes. One of the daughters said that her clothes looked strange, and she took it as a signal. She had been sensitive in recent weeks, hurt, but she did not allow herself too much. That evening, as usual, she did not close the back door, deliberately let the dog go outside. When Robert and the children returned to the house around 9 in the evening, the back door was still ajar. There was no light on the porch. The dog did not meet, and there was a kind of heavy, sticky silence in the air. Robert didn't come in. He stopped, called the emergency services, and said that he could not find his wife, that the children were in the car, that he was afraid to go inside. A few minutes later, the police were on the scene. Doris's body lay in the narrow corridor between the kitchen and the dining room. Bloodstains crawled across the tile like spiders. Many shell casings lay haphazardly on the floor. They shot at point-blank range, giving no chance for salvation. 13 shots are too many for panic, too few for chance. It was a calculation. No traces of a break-in, no missing valuables, no fingerprints. Everything looked as if a person came only for her, not for things, not for money, only for her. That same night, Robert became the main witness and the main suspect. And this was only the beginning of a game in which the stakes turned out to be deadly high. At first, Robert looked restrained, even genuinely shocked. He said that everything happened suddenly, that he did not know anything, that Doris simply returned home to change her clothes, and no one saw her again. He emphasized that he was on the field with his daughters, that he had witnesses, and even pointed to several parents who could confirm his presence. His story looked clear and logical, but something didn't add up, not so much in facts as in behavior. He spoke of Doris in the past tense with cold, almost irritated detachment, as if her death had disrupted his schedule. Investigators immediately noticed strange details. The alarm system installed in the house did not work for some reason. Everything indicated that the killer knew that the back door would be open. All the drawers and cabinets were closed, and the decorations remained untouched. No signs of robbery. It was not like an improvisation. It was a carefully constructed route. And most importantly, the door was not broken. Someone who knew the daily routine, the habits of the dog. During the interrogation, when the investigators ran out of patience, Robert was offered to honestly tell who he suspected. He asked to turn off the recorder and confessed. He has been working as a bookmaker and an informant cooperating with the police for a long time. His piece is bets, money, and connections, which are better not to be named. He said that he had received threats that someone might have decided to take revenge on him through his family. But the most attention of the investigators was not Robert's business, but the name he uttered after a pause. He said, "My brother Roger, he could do it. He knew how to enter, and he had reasons." This was the moment when the matter changed its vector. Now it was not about a lover from the internet, and about someone who knew everything too well. Roger's name immediately caused tension among the investigators. We have already heard about him before, the older brother, with whom Robert was once inseparable, but whose traces have long been lost in the murky shadows of business and criminal connections. The police started an investigation, and alarming facts surfaced very quickly. Roger actually recently left California and entered Texas several times, each time under a different name, renting hotels, renting cars, avoiding cameras and signatures. A day before the murder, he registered 2 cars at once in Houston, and a week later both were still not returned. It seemed that he was preparing for something in advance. His routes were strangely precise. He spent the night not far from Robert's house, did not appear during the day, used gloves and dark glasses, even indoors. He was a phantom, but too organized for it to be a coincidence. After checking his luggage, left after his hasty escape at the airport, the police found 2.22 caliber pistols, and the bullets matched those that had been recovered from Doris's body. In the same bag were hair dye, a wig, glasses, a note with alarm codes from Robert's house. Roger himself went into hiding for a few days. He was found in Las Vegas, where he tried to check into a hotel under a new name with a woman who thought he was a Wall Street trader. They arrested him for fake documents, not suspecting what exactly they were dealing with. Only a few days later, officers searching his hotel room found something that turned the case into a revelation. A detailed murder plan lay among the clothes and a large sum of dollars. There were steps, up to the command, "Sto delat," if Doris turns out not to be alone. There were lists of sums, notes about time, and even a disturbing phrase. "Don't forget who will speak during the interrogation. He will tell how they agreed." This was no longer a revenge committed alone. It was a contract. Someone promised, someone paid, and the investigators began to guess. Roger did not act on his own. The main breakthrough in the investigation was the discovery made in Roger's bag, a cassette with a tape recording. The sound was muffled, and most of the dialogue was lost in the noise and crackle of the old film. But what could be distinguished made even the most experienced investigators freeze. A male voice, irritated, restrained, calculating, discussed the details of the upcoming murder. He talked about alarms, mentioned names, knew the interior layout of the house and the habits of the family. The second voice, softer and more pliable, clarified from time to time whether Doris's wedding ring should be taken away, what to do with the dog, and how quickly they should disappear after the shots. When the 4 of them listened to the recording, no one said a word. Everything that happened up to this moment could be interpreted as pressure, coincidence, even revenge on the part of the unstable Roger. But there was an instruction here. There was a discussion here. Here were words that could not be known by an outsider. One of the voices said the alarm code, the same one that Doris had changed just 2 months before the divorce, and which only she and Robert knew. Experts tried to improve the sound quality, but even in the purest fragment, the voice could not be identified with 100% accuracy. However, to those who knew Robert, he seemed suspiciously familiar. Calm, a little monotonous, with familiar phrases that he often used in communication. But this was still an assumption, not proof. Then the family got involved. Daughters Ella and Gina claimed that the voice on the recording did not belong to their father. They said that the second voice called the rooms differently than they were used to at home, used foreign expressions and strange intonations. But the matter no longer depended on their words. The police were sure that Roger could not have made this plan alone. And if the second voice belonged to Robert, it meant only one thing. He didn't just know what was going to happen. He ordered it. When Robert was charged, he didn't even flinch. Not a single muscle twitched on his face, as if he had been expecting this from the very beginning. His lawyer, one of the best in the state, submitted a statement that the accusation was false, referring to the lack of direct evidence as well as to the suicide of Roger, who allegedly took all the blame on himself. In the suicide note found in his cell, the brother assured that he acted alone, that Robert had nothing to do with the murder, and that all the evidence found was fabricated in order to inflict pain on him in revenge for the past. It was too convenient, too clean. The investigation delved into Robert's past. They checked his accounts, safe deposit boxes, connections with bookmakers. The discovered sums exceeded what he officially indicated in the reports. Moreover, it turned out that during the divorce proceedings, Doris received only half of the $3 million, while according to the documents, Robert had twice the amount. This not only confirmed his desire to hide assets, it showed fear of being exposed. Divorce was not just the loss of a family. It was a threat to his business, his financial security, his flawless cover. On Doris's birthday, 5 days before the murder, Robert threw her a party with champagne, guests, and things. He behaved as if everything is getting better again. Everyone thought that they were making peace. Everything, except him. Because on the same day, Roger received the first part of the money. Investigators found Robert's fingerprints on bills in a suitcase that Roger kept. And even if this was not enough, the puzzle began to take shape. The prosecutor's office tried to prove that if it weren't for Roger, Robert would have found a second executor. If it were not for the alarm code, the murder would not have been successful. And if it weren't for his money, it wouldn't have happened at all. This was not an accident. This was the solution. Cold, calculating, like a step on someone else's life, made almost without a sound. The trial lasted 8 days, but it seemed endless. Every day, the jurors heard new layers of Robert Eldridge's tangled life. Stories about shadow schemes, mysterious meetings, records, millions, lovers, and a dead woman whose name was spoken less and less. The accusation persisted. Robert organized the murder of his wife out of fear of exposure, out of a desire to preserve capital, out of cold, heartless greed. The defense argued that he was a victim of the revenge of his sick brother, a man with a mania for persecution and a criminal fantasy, who wanted to destroy everything that he once could not build himself. The audio recording itself became the key moment of the process. It sounded in the courtroom several times, crackling, deaf, frighteningly intimate. The sound was cleaned, experts were hired, and spectral analysis was performed. One of the experts claimed that there was an 80% chance that the voice did not belong to Robert. Another doubted. The girls again stated that it was not their father on the tape, but the jury heard something else. They heard a man who knew too much, who could not be an outsider. Defense attorneys deftly countered that Roger had 2 guns, rented 2 cars, so he could be talking to himself, using technology to create the illusion of dialogue. He collected fake documents, disguised himself, left traces behind him in order to mislead. He had already framed his brother once. Why would he do it again? The prosecution insisted. Roger could be a performer, but not a director. And then all eyes turned to Robert again. Only one circumstance stood in the way of the point. Roger was dead. The ego will not be interrogated, will not be compared, will not be refuted. And without him, the business lost weight, like a building without a foundation. The jury deliberated for 4 days, and when they came out, their verdict was unanimous. Robert Eldridge was found not guilty, and there was silence in the courtroom. Not a solemn one, but deafening, as if the truth remained behind the walls. After the acquittal, Robert did not return to his old life. His name, despite the court's decision, did not disappear from the newspapers, did not leave the whispers of the neighbors, was not erased from the memory of the girls who, despite the defense in court, no longer looked at their father the same way. He spent the following months in the shadows, avoiding publicity, closed the sports club, reorganized all assets, and disappeared from his usual social life. But this silence was not the finale, only a lull before the second act. The FBI, having received the case materials, reopened the investigation, no longer as a murder but as a federal crime. They did not come for blood, but for money, taxes, and documents that were not available before. Robert was the focus of a new attack. He was accused of not paying taxes, of violating the law on forged documents, of trying to hide from the court. He tried to escape, on a foreign passport, with a foreign name, to a foreign country. But he was detained at the Amsterdam airport, where the forgery was discovered. Holland agreed to extradite him to the United States, but only on less serious charges. The death of Doris remained outside the jurisdiction. Robert received 8 years. He sat in silence. No confession, no interview, no repentance. He was released in 2012. Neither the press nor neighbors nor former business partners heard about him anymore. There were rumors that he moved to Southern Europe, that he received citizenship through his father, that he leads a modest, inconspicuous life somewhere in a small town. Or maybe he just disappeared. No one ever found out if that voice on the tape belonged to an EMU. No one could prove whether he was a customer or just a silent witness. But one thing remains indisputable. A woman named Doris Eldridge did not die from gunshots. She died from the betrayal that came from the side where her home and family once stood. Investigators tried to reopen the murder case under federal articles related to the organization of the crime, but the evidence base remained insufficient. The alleged key witness, a crime writer, refused to hand over materials from Roger's interrogations, citing journalistic secrecy, and spent 6 months in prison for it. Roger Eldridge, the alleged executor, died in the cell before the court, leaving a controversial suicide note in which he took all the blame on himself. The voice on the audio recording discussing the murder has never been officially identified. Robert Eldridge was released from prison in 2012 and has not appeared in public since then. Presumably, at this point in time, he lives outside the United States. There were no new accused in the case of the death of his wife. Due to these circumstances, the death of Doris Eldridge remains, from a legal point of view, an unsolved crime.